Sebastian Hale stood on the balcony of his penthouse atop the Hale Tower, a 92-story monolith of glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline like a scepter of power. At 53, he was every inch the emblem of American wealth. Silver hair swept back meticulously, a tailored Tom Ford suit that molded to his still athletic frame, and a Cartier watch that ticked like a metronome of privilege. The city sprawled beneath him, tiny yellow taxis, flashing billboards, a churning river of ambition he no longer needed to swim in. He owned the current. Behind him, the party roared. The champagne flowed like a second river, and the air inside was thick with the scent of perfume, caviar, and whispered stock tips. Celebrities laughed too loudly. Billionaires nodded solemnly, as if discussing the fate of nations. Supermodels clung to arms like delicate silk accessories. But Sebastian felt none of it. He held a crystal tumbler of aged scotch, Macallan 72, $140,000 a bottle, and yet the burn in his throat couldn't warm the chill inside him. The night was a celebration, the 25th anniversary of Hale Holdings going public. His company, his empire, a fortune born of luxury real estate, venture capital, and ruthless mergers. But celebration felt hollow when you had everything and no one. He turned away from the city, stepping back inside. The living room was a temple of modern decadence. Walls made of Brazilian walnut, hand-painted silk murals, a Steinway grand piano untouched by anyone but paid professionals. He had designed this life to be untouchable. Then he saw her. It wasn't possible. Across the room, among the glittering crowd, stood a woman in a deep emerald dress. Her back was to him, but even after all these years, he knew the line of those shoulders. The way her head tilted when she laughed, gentle, amused, a touch of sarcasm. The same black hair, though it now had threads of silver. No stylist could mimic that grace. Not for a second did he doubt it. Isabella, a name he hadn't spoken in decades. A name he had buried under layers of other women, business deals, and apartments in St. Bart's. He hadn't seen her since that morning in Boston, 25 years ago. The morning he left without a word, chasing an opportunity that couldn't include love, weakness, or her. His chest tightened. What was she doing here? And then the boy turned around. No, not a boy. A young man, maybe 25. Tall, lean, dressed in a tailored navy suit. His jawline sharp, eyes like flint. His walk confident, but not arrogant. Sebastian's drink slipped, shattered on the marble floor. The young man looked exactly like him. Not similar. Identical. Like a photograph of Sebastian in his 20s, come to life. He could have been his ghost. His heir. His blood rushed to Sebastian's ears. The music drowned under a roar of memory and disbelief. He pushed past guests, ignoring their greetings. His assistant, Penelope, tried to stop him. Mr. Hale? The governor just arrived. Clear the room, he barked. Now. He reached the private elevator, punched the button with a trembling hand. As the door slid shut, he got one last glimpse of Isabella. She hadn't seen him yet. Or maybe she had. And that slight, knowing smile on her lips? That terrified him more than anything. The elevator sank like a gilded coffin, too slow for the storm inside Sebastian Hale's chest. His reflection glared back at him from mirrored walls, polished, powerful, composed. But beneath the silk tie and the hand-stitched suit was a man unraveling. In all his years navigating billion-dollar negotiations and high society scandals, he had never felt this unsteady. He gripped the railing as though the world itself was tilting. That young man upstairs, he wasn't just familiar. He was identical. 25 years peeled away in a blink, and it was like looking into a mirror fogged by time. He hadn't seen Isabella Moreau since the morning he left her. Boston, 2000. He'd just closed a ruthless real estate deal that gave him his first building downtown. A brownstone he flipped for triple its value. She was waiting tables at a French bistro near Beacon Hill, dark curls pinned carelessly, camera always slung over her shoulder. She'd captured his attention before dessert and his heart before dawn. They had lived in a pocket of borrowed time. Her apartment smelled like vanilla candles and cinnamon toast. She took photos of him sleeping, fingers tracing the lines of his jaw like she was memorizing him for a future she couldn't afford to lose. And he left. No goodbye, no warning. Just a note taped to her fridge beside one of her black and white prints. I'm sorry. S. He buried her in the same place he stored all his regrets, under wealth, under women, under the ever-growing skyline of his ambition. And it had worked. For a time. Now, she had reappeared in his kingdom. With a boy, a man, who could only be his son. The elevator doors parted with a hush into the private parking level. His Rolls-Royce Phantom awaited like a loyal beast. Midnight black, whisper quiet, worth more than most people's mortgages. Amos, his stoic driver of 12 years, opened the door. "Where to, sir?" Amos asked. Sebastian slid into the back seat, eyes like glass. "Just drive." They cruised through Manhattan, the city slick with rain and glittering under lights. The streets blurred, a stream of wealth and want, glass towers next to food carts. He barely saw any of it. His mind was in Boston, in a memory he had tried to suffocate for 2.5 decades. "Amos," he finally said, voice low. "Find out who invited Isabella Moreau to the Hale anniversary gala. I want a name, and I want them fired." "Yes, sir." "And the young man with her. I want everything, birth records, school history, employment." Discreetly. "Of course." Sebastian rested his head against the cool leather. 25 years. If the boy was his, and he had no doubt, Isabella had kept the secret flawlessly. No lawsuits, no demands, no whispers in the tabloids. Had she spared him or punished him? A bitter laugh escaped him. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, she alone had taken nothing, and that terrified him. Why now? Why tonight? Was it coincidence she came to the gala? Or was this deliberate? A message? His empire stood on legacy, on calculated bloodlines, and power passed like a title. And now, a silent heir had appeared. Outside the walls of the world Sebastian had crafted with cold precision. Was the boy here to claim something? Or to take everything? Sebastian stared out into the night, the city no longer a kingdom, but a battlefield. The morning sun crept into the penthouse through floor-to-ceiling windows, brushing against walls of Italian marble and silk drapery, as if afraid to wake the beast that lived there. Sebastian Hale sat in his private study, staring at a manila folder that lay unopened on his mahogany desk, a relic in a room filled with touch screens and rare art. He hadn't slept. His scotch glass was still half full. He hadn't touched it. Amos had delivered the file at 5:12 a.m. sharp, just as ordered. Now, nearly 2 hours later, Sebastian still couldn't bring himself to lift the cover. Instead, he sat motionless in a velvet armchair worth more than most cars, his hand drumming the armrest, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He had built his fortune with ruthless precision. Hale Holdings wasn't just a company. It was a machine of influence. He controlled office towers in Manhattan, condos in Miami, and entire beachfront developments in Malibu. Senators called him. Governors lunched with him. Even the president once accepted his helicopter ride to avoid a D.C. protest. But no amount of money had prepared him for the hollow that now stretched inside his chest like a canyon. A gaping absence that could only be filled by the truth. He opened the folder. At first, there were photographs. One showed the young man standing in front of the Museum of Modern Art, hands in his pockets, gaze slightly averted. He was lean, like Sebastian once was, with the same dark blonde hair and cool confidence. Another photo showed him speaking to a crowd at some kind of university event. Below it, Elias Moreau, age 25, graduate of Columbia University, magna cum laude, currently a junior portfolio analyst at Blackstone. Blackstone? Sebastian scoffed. So the boy had ambition. There were no criminal records, no paternity suits, no skeletons in the closet, yet. But then came the timeline. Born, March 17, 2001. Boston, Massachusetts. Mother, Isabella Moreau. Father, not listed. Sebastian's hands froze on the page. March 17th. 9 months, almost to the day, after he'd left her. He knew. There was no doubt now. Elias was his son. But what struck him more, what cut deeper than he expected, was how perfectly Isabella had kept it from him. No contact. No drama. She had built this boy on her own. Raised him, educated him, and launched him into the same brutal financial world Sebastian ruled, all without ever asking for a dime. She hadn't needed him. His son hadn't needed him. That stung. He closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the chandelier above. The kind of Swarovski monster designers called a statement. But today it felt like it was mocking him. He thought of the hundreds of gala photos snapped the night before. Cameras flashing, guests laughing, toasting him like a god. And yet, in one uninvited glance, his kingdom had trembled. There was a soft knock. Penelope, his assistant, entered quietly. "Mr. Hale, I have the press schedule for next week's event in Palm Beach. Should I cancel your appearance?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "In fact, I want to add something." Penelope raised an eyebrow. He rarely changed anything once it was on the calendar. "I want to host a private luncheon. Invite select media. Tell them. I'll be making a personal announcement." Her eyes flicked to the folder on the desk, then back to him. "Understood." When she left, Sebastian walked over to the window and looked out over the city he ruled. There were two things he never allowed in his world: uncertainty and legacy threats. Now, both had a face, and that face had his eyes. It was time to meet Elias Moreau. Not through paper, in person, and he would not be caught off guard again. The invitation arrived 2 days later, delivered by hand in a navy blue envelope with no return address. It was tucked beneath the doors of a modest loft in Brooklyn, modern, minimalist, and far more humble than the penthouse Elias Moreau could have afforded with his Blackstone salary, or the one his biological father could have handed him with a signature. Elias lifted the envelope slowly, studying the weight of the paper, the embossed initials, SH. He already knew what it meant. He sat down at his reclaimed wood dining table, the one he'd built himself with Isabella's help during a summer off from college. His mother was upstairs, working in the soft light of her attic studio, no doubt editing portraits for the Vermont gallery she managed remotely. He opened the envelope carefully, like he was defusing a bomb. Inside, a single, handwritten card. "Elias, I believe it's time we talked. Tomorrow, 1 p.m., the Hale Club, 63rd and Madison. Ask for the Langley Room. S.H. No apology. No signature beyond initials. No mention of the 25 years. Just power, masked as politeness." Elias stared at the card, heart ticking slowly, deliberately. His mother had warned him this day might come. Ever since she told him the truth. On his 18th birthday, no less. He'd lived with the shadow of a man he'd never met but couldn't escape. He had studied finance because of him, chosen New York because of him, even dressed like him, sometimes unconsciously. But Elias wasn't here to be found. He was here to confront. The Hale Club was not a restaurant. It was an institution, one of those whisper-quiet, invitation-only fortresses where America's elite sealed empires over dry martinis and filet mignon. A marble lion guarded the entrance, its paw resting on a globe. Elias passed beneath its cold stare and stepped into a foyer lined with oil paintings and hush. The concierge, dressed like royalty, blinked when Elias gave his name. He recovered instantly. "Right this way, Mr. Moreau." Up a grand staircase, through a velvet curtain corridor. Finally, into a chamber that felt like the parlor of a Roman emperor. Gold trim, ancient books, a fire crackling though it was August. And there he was. Sebastian Hale stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over Manhattan like he owned the air itself. He turned slowly as Elias entered, and for a moment, both men simply stared. It was like a fault line running through time. Father and son, past and future, guilt and defiance. "You look like someone I used to be," Sebastian said finally, voice smooth as old whiskey. Elias didn't smile. "I look like someone you left." Sebastian nodded once, accepting the blow without flinching. "Have a seat." They sat across from each other at a table set with crystal water glasses, untouched menus, and tension thick enough to chew. "I assume you've done your homework," Sebastian said. "I read about the yachts, yes." A flicker of amusement crossed Sebastian's face. "And your mother? She knows you're here?" "She told me you'd contact me one day. She just didn't think it would be after 25 years. A long silence. "I made a mistake," Sebastian said. "But I didn't come here to apologize. That would be insufficient. I came to ask a question." Elias folded his arms. "I'm listening." Sebastian leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "Are you here to destroy me? Or to inherit me?" The air between them crackled. Elias didn't answer. Not yet. Sebastian had stared down CEOs, senators, and foreign royals, but none unnerved him like the man seated across from him now. His own son, cloaked not in arrogance, but in calm defiance. Elias carried himself with a self-made confidence, not borrowed from privilege, but carved from quiet resolve. It was the same quality that had once drawn Isabella to Sebastian, and the same quality that now reminded him of what he'd abandoned. "You built this empire," Elias said finally, his voice low but steady. "And now you want to hand me the keys because I share your DNA?" "I didn't say that," Sebastian replied. "I'm not offering anything." "Then what are you offering?" Sebastian studied him. "I'm offering the truth. And maybe a choice." Elias laughed under his breath. "You don't get to say truth like it's currency. You buried the truth 25 years ago and hoped it would never claw its way back." "True," Sebastian admitted, never one to deny a cold fact. "But here we are. You're not just my son, Elias. You're my only heir. The board doesn't know that yet, of course, nor do the vultures circling to claim the crown when I step down next year." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Why tell me now?" "Because last week I saw you, and I realized two things. One, you are not like the hollow men around me. And two, I don't want Hale Holdings to die with them." He poured himself a glass of still water, taking his time. "I've built something few men achieve. But legacy is a cruel mistress. Money dies with weak sons. You're not weak." Elias leaned forward. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Sebastian replied. "You've worked since college. You refuse trust funds. You live modestly, by your own code. Your mother raised you well." Elias flinched, and for the first time, Sebastian saw the vulnerability beneath the hard surface. "Don't talk about her like you know her," Elias said, voice sharp. "You forfeited that right." Sebastian nodded once, accepting the rebuke. "Fair." Another silence fell, this one heavier. "Why me?" Elias finally asked. "You could sell the company, retire to an island, marry a model half your age." "I've done all that already," Sebastian said flatly. "And none of it mattered. Not like this." He rose and walked to the fireplace, pulling a key from his pocket. "There's a vault in my office, 3rd floor, Hale Tower. This key opens it. Inside are documents, contracts, and journals mine. I want you to read them. Then we'll talk about what comes next." Elias took the key without speaking. Its weight felt ancient. Loaded. Sebastian returned to his seat. "You asked me earlier, am I offering you anything? I suppose I am. But not power. Responsibility. You can walk away after reading that vault. I won't chase you. But if you stay—" "If I stay?" Elias asked. Sebastian's voice dropped, eyes steady. "If you stay, I will name you as my successor. Publicly. Legally. Entirely. And I'll show you how to carry it. Not because you're my son, but because you might be the only one strong enough to survive the throne I built." Elias looked at him, measured, silent. And for the first time, Sebastian felt something other than control, something older, more dangerous. Hope, and the beginning of fear. Elias stood in front of the Hale Tower 2 days later, the key Sebastian had given him cool in his palm. The building loomed above him like a monument to hubris. 92 floors of smoked glass and steel rising into a sky so blue it looked painted. Tourists took selfies at its base. Chauffeurs in dark suits waited beside idling Bentleys. But to Elias, the tower wasn't just a skyscraper. It was a confession waiting to be unlocked. Security let him through without a word. Clearly, Sebastian had informed them in advance. No questions, no ID checks, just a nod and an elevator that hummed as it ascended like a throne rising toward judgment. The 3rd floor was nothing like the grand lobby or the high-tech boardrooms Elias had expected. It was quiet, sterile, almost clinical. The hallway was lined with matte black panels, each one hiding something beneath. At the far end stood a single frosted glass door marked only by a gold placard. "Private archive, authorized entry only." He used the key. Inside, the room was cold and silent. Mahogany shelves lined the walls, packed not with books, but leather-bound ledgers, thick files, and unmarked boxes. A scent of aged paper and money hung in the air. This was not a storage room. It was a mausoleum for power. The vault was built like a sanctuary, fireproof, soundproof, untouched by the chaos outside. And in the center, resting on a marble pedestal beneath a single overhead spotlight, was a large black binder. No title, no label. He opened it. The first page was a letter. "To the man I never raised, but may yet inherit the storm I leave behind." Elias read the letter, slowly, absorbing each sentence like venom. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation, Sebastian's rise from a neglected son of steel mill workers in Pennsylvania to one of the wealthiest men in America. It detailed his sacrifices, his emotional amputations, the people he left behind to build Hale Holdings. One of them, perhaps the most important, was Isabella. I knew I loved her, the letter read, and that was the problem. Love makes you hesitate, and hesitation is fatal in a world ruled by wolves. Elias flipped the pages. Handwritten journals followed. Entries that tracked Sebastian's mergers, betrayals, political manipulations, and his transformation into a ghost of the man Isabella once knew. It was raw, brutal, and disturbingly honest. There were lists of people he'd crushed. Photos of rival CEOs, crossed out like targets. A note scribbled beside one. Trust no heir who's never starved. Then came the documents. Legal arrangements naming board members, backdoor holdings in offshore accounts, pre-negotiated settlements in the event of lawsuits. The final page was a draft of a legal amendment. Name, Elias Morrow. Status, biological heir. Position, interim CEO, effective upon declaration. Elias closed the binder. He felt sick, not because he was shocked by what he found, but because a dark part of him understood it. The ruthlessness, the clarity, the cost of empire. He had admired Sebastian from afar for years, unaware the blood in his own veins carried that same cold fire. And now, the man who had once walked away from everything was offering it all back. He turned to leave. Then, something caught his eye, another box, tucked away behind the shelves. Not locked. No labels. He opened it and froze. Inside were photographs. Dozens. All of him. Elias at age 10 on a bike. At 14, playing high school baseball. Graduating from Columbia. All taken from afar, blurry, clearly hidden. He staggered back. Sebastian had been watching him his entire life. Elias slammed the lid shut. This wasn't just business anymore. This was something else. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be clean. The city was loud that night, but Elias couldn't hear it. He sat alone on the rooftop of his Brooklyn loft, the skyline glittering in the distance like a lie told too beautifully to doubt. The key Sebastian had given him lay beside an untouched glass of whiskey. His fingers drummed against the rusted metal table, restless. The photos haunted him. Sebastian hadn't just walked away and forgotten. He'd watched Elias grow up from the shadows like a man monitoring an investment. Every photo felt like a betrayal, or worse, a possession. Why hadn't he stepped in? If he cared enough to stalk the edges of Elias's life, why not ever say something? Introduce himself? Apologize? Claim him? The binder's contents had been worse than he expected. And yet, somehow, the worst part wasn't the greed, the manipulation, the silent puppeteering. It was the brutal clarity of it all. Sebastian didn't pretend to be a good man. He had documented his sins like trophies. He never forgot Elias. He simply didn't need him until now. And Elias? The twisted truth was that part of him had always wondered what it might be like to live on the inside of that glass tower instead of staring up at it, to wear power like a second skin, to know the world feared your name. But now that the offer was real, it tasted rotten. The roof door opened behind him. Elias. He turned. Isabella stood there, barefoot, in a soft gray sweater, the city breeze catching the strands of silver in her hair. You saw him, she said, not as a question. He nodded. And he wants me to take over. Hale Holdings. Everything. Isabella's expression didn't change. She crossed the rooftop slowly, eyes heavy but unsurprised. I knew that's why he reached out, she said quietly. Sebastian Hale never reappears unless something's at stake. Elias hesitated. He said he watched us. For years. She sighed. I suspected. But he never contacted me. Never sent money. Never once interfered. Part of me thought that meant he didn't care. Part of me hoped it meant he did, and was just afraid. Elias swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell him when I was born? She looked at him, and her voice, when it came, was steady. Because you deserved a childhood untouched by his empire. I wanted you to grow up knowing love, not leverage. They stood in silence, the city humming around them. But you raised me to fight, Elias said. To think. To lead. And now he's asking me to sit on a throne made of knives. Isabella's eyes met his. Then maybe it's time you decided who you really are. Elias looked back at the skyline. Half of him wanted to walk away. The other half wanted to walk in and burn the whole kingdom down. Monday morning, 9:03 a.m. Sebastian Hale entered the boardroom of Hale Holdings wearing a gray silk suit, sharp as a scalpel. The room fell silent, not because the board wasn't expecting him, but because of who entered behind him. Elias, clean-shaven, tailored navy suit, no tie. Calm, composed, and unannounced. 12 board members turned like statues to watch him. Some whispered. A few narrowed their eyes. One, a longtime investor from Qatar, arched a single brow, intrigued. Sebastian took his seat at the head of the long obsidian table. Gentlemen, ladies. His voice cut clean through the tension. Before we begin, I want to introduce someone. Elias Morrow. He paused. Let it hang. My son. A gasp rippled. The general counsel dropped her pen. CFO Carter stiffened. He will be joining us today, Sebastian continued. As an observer. An observer. Not yet a successor. A test, unspoken but heavy. Elias nodded once. He didn't smile. The meeting began. Budgets. Earnings. Expansion into Singapore. Discussions of political contributions. Sebastian remained composed, offering sharp comments, strategic insights, but every now and then, he glanced at Elias, watching him more than the numbers. Elias didn't speak, but he watched everything. How the Saudi investor negotiated with silence. How Carter deflected risk with dense graphs. How the two oldest members deferred to Sebastian, not because of loyalty, but fear. This wasn't a company. It was a kingdom. And Sebastian was a king whose reign had never been questioned. Until now. After 2 hours, the meeting ended. Most left quickly, murmuring. Only Carter lingered. He approached Elias slowly, as if evaluating a piece of art he didn't like, but might one day be forced to buy. So, Carter said, voice smooth. You're the secret. Elias tilted his head. Guess I'm not a secret anymore. Carter smiled thinly. Be careful, Elias. Legacy is a fragile thing. And this board doesn't like surprises. Elias didn't blink. Good. I like to keep people uncomfortable. Carter studied him for another second, then turned and left. Sebastian walked over, nodding toward the empty room. What did you see? Elias folded his arms. Weakness pretending to be strength. Sharks trying not to bleed. And you? Sebastian raised a brow. You're already halfway gone. Sebastian smirked, pleased. Then you're seeing clearly. They stood in the silence of a room built on wealth, lies, and ambition. And for the first time, Sebastian believed. This boy might truly be ready. The rain fell hard that night. A summer storm lashing Manhattan's glass towers with the fury of something trying to wash away sins too deeply rooted to budge. Elias stood at the window of Sebastian's penthouse, watching the storm rage below. The city glittered through the downpour, distorted and trembling. Behind him, Sebastian poured 2 glasses of red wine. Petrus, naturally, from his private cellar. Worth more than Elias's college tuition. To legacy, Sebastian said, raising his glass. Elias turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Is that what this is about? Legacy? Sebastian smiled faintly. It always is. Money is transient. Power is cyclical. But legacy, that's what men like me die building. They drank. The silence stretched. Then Elias stepped toward the desk in the corner, the same one where he'd seen photos of himself locked away like secrets. He gestured toward it. How long did you keep those pictures? Sebastian didn't flinch. Since you were 5. Elias stared at him. Why not come find me? I did, Sebastian said. I was at your baseball game in Vermont. You hit a home run and ran like hell around the bases. Your mother was in the stands. She was smiling so wide. She looked whole. He looked down at his glass. And I realized I would only ruin that. Elias's breath caught. Sebastian continued. You think I was cold for leaving? Maybe I was. But part of me knew that if I stayed, you'd become me. And no child deserves that. The admission stunned Elias. It didn't excuse 25 years of silence, but it cracked something in the marble wall between them. I still became you, Elias said. Without your help. Without your name. Sebastian smiled. Exactly. And now, you're stronger for it. A moment passed. Then Elias stepped closer. So what now? You introduce me to the board, train me, hand me the throne, and disappear? Sebastian studied him carefully. I've built this life to be untouchable. But lately, I've realized it's lonely up here. I thought the empire was enough. But I've begun to wonder if I built the kingdom just to avoid admitting I was afraid of people. Elias didn't answer. He turned back, toward the window. I want to believe you, he said quietly. But part of me wonders if you're only doing this now because you're running out of time. Sebastian took a slow sip of wine. You're right. Elias glanced over, surprised. I am running out of time, Sebastian said. And that's why I need to know. He set the glass down. When the storm finally takes me, will you protect the house I built? Elias stared at him. And for the first time, he smiled. I won't protect it, he said. I'll rebuild it. Sebastian's eyes sparkled, not with fear, with pride. 2 weeks later, the announcement made headlines around the world. Sebastian Hale named secret son as successor to Hale Holdings. The mysterious heir. Who is Elias Moreau? From nowhere to the top, a bloodline revealed. Financial analysts speculated. Socialites whispered. Rivals smiled with thin lips, waiting for the boy to fail. Elias stood before a wall of cameras at the Hale Tower press conference, the lights almost blinding. He wore the navy suit again, this time with a tie. The podium bore the company's gold insignia. His name was now etched beside it. Sebastian sat to the side, quiet but present, watching with an unreadable expression. Elias didn't read from a script. He didn't smile for the headlines. He simply looked into the crowd of powerful strangers and said, I am not here because of a last name. I didn't grow up in this tower. I wasn't raised on privilege. I worked. I bled. I stood on the outside looking in until now. Flashbulbs popped. I've read the books. I've seen the accounts. I know this company better than anyone who's ever sat at this podium, because I studied it like a puzzle I was never meant to solve. He paused. And now, I intend to change it. Gasps rippled. The CFO's jaw twitched. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Elias leaned in. This is not a monarchy, and I am not a shadow of my father. I am the fire he left behind. The press exploded with questions, but Elias left the stage without another word. That night, Sebastian stood alone on the penthouse balcony, city lights flickering beneath him like fading stars. A glass of bourbon in his hand, his suit jacket undone, hair wind-tousled. He looked older, but lighter. Elias stepped beside him, silent for a moment. Heard I scared your board today, Elias said. Sebastian smiled. Good. They need to be scared. Another pause. Are you proud? Elias asked. Sebastian looked at him. Really looked. No, he said. I'm grateful. Elias tilted his head. For what? That the one thing I didn't control turned out to be the only thing worth leaving behind. The wind picked up, and somewhere below, in the city he once ruled alone, the world began to whisper a new name. Not Hale, but Moreau. The kingdom had a new architect, and this time, the throne wasn't inherited. It was earned.